There's a phrase that Carl Jung noted in his personal diaries in the final years of his career that should disturb anyone who has ever felt their stomach turn at the achievement of someone close. He wrote that what we detest most in others is precisely what we cannot admit in ourselves. Jung called this the shadow, but he was speaking of something much more concrete than cheap mysticism. He was describing the mechanism by which we transform our own discomfort into criticism of another's success. Why is it easier to say that the neighbor got lucky than to admit that perhaps we are afraid to try? Why do we feel a secret relief when someone who was rising stumbles? And why does this seem to suck away our own capacity to prosper? If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity now so as not to lose the next episodes of this investigation. Warning: this documentary uses AI-generated images for illustrative purposes. Although the visual is synthetic, the content is the fruit of rigorous research based on real historical and scientific sources. Sources in the description. In one of his letters to Freud, preserved in the archives of the correspondence between the two, Jung relates a clinical case that intrigued him. A patient had been systematically losing friendships whenever someone in her circle prospered. It was not a coincidence. The woman developed an almost supernatural capacity to find defects in every achievement of others. A new job becomes beginner's luck. A happy relationship becomes a honeymoon that does not last. A new house becomes unnecessary ostentation. Jung realized that she was not reacting to the success of the other, but to the mirror that this success created regarding her own unadmitted frustrations. The proximity intensified everything because the comparison ceased to be abstract and became personal. Think about this. When was the last time you felt genuine, automatic joy at the victory of someone close? Before any self-control, what was the real reaction? If there was hesitation, discomfort, or that impulse to look for the but in the other's conquest, you have just touched upon a mechanism that historical records have documented for centuries. The Latin word invidia, from where our envy comes, literally means to look with hostility. It is not about wanting to have, it is about suffering because the other has. The Latin dictionaries of Lewis and Short describe invidia as a hostility directed at he who possesses something desirable. Notice this detail. It is not the desire for the thing, it is the hostility towards the person. Envy is not "I want that." It is "how dare he have that." It is a social mechanism so ancient that entire societies created rituals to deal with it. The evil eye, the amulets, the healers, all of this documents the collective perception that there exists something dense, heavy, destructive in directed envy. Jung, in his studies on projection described in Ion, suggested that this phenomenon does not work by magic, but by a very specific psychological process. When you cannot admit your own frustrations, fears, or omissions, the unconscious projects these conflicts onto the environment. The success of the other becomes proof of your incompetence. The achievement of others becomes evidence of your lack of luck. The prosperity of those who are near becomes confirmation that the world is unjust to you specifically. Only this mental operation has a high and verifiable cost. Leon Festinger, in research on social comparison published in the 50s, mapped something that anyone can test in their own daily life. He discovered that we tend to compare ourselves with people close in situation, age, context. We do not compare ourselves with distant billionaires. We compare ourselves with colleagues, cousins, neighbors, school friends. And there the thing complicates, because the difference in results within the same circle becomes an uncomfortable question. If this person succeeded and I did not, what does this say about my choices? Try to follow this turn. Envy may not be an emotion about the other, but a form of avoiding a question about yourself. Instead of facing, why did I not try this? Why did I give up? Why am I afraid? It is easier to transform the discomfort into external criticism. And there begin the masks that we all know. This will not last. He does not deserve it. It was luck. Money does not bring happiness. He who has much always wants more. Richard Smith, who spent decades studying envy in the literature of social psychology, identified a disturbing pattern in the accounts he collected. The people most affected by envy were not necessarily those who had less, but those who lived in a permanent state of comparison. They developed a species of social radar that constantly monitored who was rising, who was falling, who deserved or did not deserve what they had. It becomes a mental accounting that consumes cognitive energy all the time. Notice how this translates into the day-to-day. Do you know someone who seems to know all the details of the financial life of others? Who always has an opinion about the spending, the achievements, the decisions of those who are prospering? Who demonstrates a strange concern with the justice of others' results? This mental pattern is not neutral. It alters concrete choices. Research on rumination shows that repetitive and negative thoughts drain mental resources that could be focused on productive action. When a significant part of your mental energy is occupied processing the success of others, less capacity remains to sustain consistent effort on your own goals. It is like having a permanent mental conversation about why so-and-so does not deserve what he has, instead of using this time to build what you want. Thorstein Veblen, in The Theory of the Leisure Class, described another destructive mechanism that accompanies envy: consumption for status. When the annoyance with others' success becomes pressure to not be left behind, people begin to spend energy and money on symbols of social position instead of investing in real capabilities. They buy to appear prosperous, not to build prosperity. It becomes an expensive and useless race where everyone loses, except those who are selling the symbols. Perhaps the most uncomfortable thing is not the envy itself, but perceiving how it operates silently. It does not come with a warning. It does not announce, "Now you will suffer with the achievement of others and make self-destructive choices because of it." It disguises itself as realism, as genuine concern, as sincere opinion. I am only alerting that this will not work out. It is not envy, it is experience. Someone needs to speak the truth. Robert Putnam, in his research on social capital, documented in Bowling Alone, offers another piece of the puzzle. He shows how prosperous societies depend on trust and cooperation between individuals. Healthy social networks are the fabric through which circulate information, opportunities, partnerships, referrals. Envy corrodes this fabric because it transforms potential allies into symbolic threats. Instead of celebrating achievements as proof of possibility, the envious person sees them as evidence of scarcity. Pay attention to this mechanism. If I believe that there exists a fixed limit of available success, the prosperity of the other automatically reduces my chances. It is a zero-sum game where the victory of others is my defeat. But if I understand prosperity as abundant and expandable, the success of the other becomes evidence that it is possible inspiration, even useful information about paths that work. The difference between these two visions is not only philosophical, it is practical. He who lives in the logic of scarcity avoids prosperous people because the proximity hurts. He who lives in the logic of abundance seeks this proximity because he wants to learn. One posture isolates, the other connects. And connections are exactly what sustain opportunities in the real world. Here's the strangest part. Many people seek to protect themselves from envious people and to identify the evil eye, but this constant search can also be a symptom. If you live in fear that others will harm your prosperity through envy, what does this reveal about your own relationship with abundance? Does real security exist, or does the fear of losing indicate that the mentality of scarcity is still active? Jung, in letters to colleagues preserved in the archives of Kusnacht, mentioned that some of his patients most obsessed with protections against envy were also the most envious, as if the radar to detect hostility from others was calibrated by internal hostility itself. It is an uncomfortable observation because it suggests that the problem is not always external. Look at how this appears here. When someone close conquers something big, what is the automatic reaction? Before any social filter, before self-control, what is the first impulse? If it is not genuine joy, this does not necessarily make you a bad person, but it points to something worth investigating. Why does the success of others bother? What does this reaction reveal about your internal beliefs regarding deservingness, possibility, justice? The research of Niels van de Ven on types of envy brought a useful distinction. There exists malicious envy, which wants to bring the other down, and benign envy, which wants to reach the same level. The difference lies in the direction of the energy. One pulls down, the other pushes up. But both start from the same discomfort with the difference of results, and both can become obstacles if they are not recognized and processed consciously. It may be that the point is not to eliminate envy totally, but to recognize it as a thermometer. It points exactly to where you still live under scarcity, fear, comparison. Instead of fighting with the symptom, perhaps it makes more sense to investigate what it is signaling. If the success of the other hurts, what does this reveal about your own identity? What type of choices has this identity produced? And most importantly, are these choices taking you to where you really want to go? Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa Theologica, classified envy as a vice precisely because it prevents the person from rejoicing in the good. It is not an abstract moral question, it is a practical question. He who cannot celebrate the achievements of others loses access to a natural source of energy and inspiration. He becomes someone who feeds on failures instead of successes, who seeks confirmation through the fall of others instead of his own ascent. This is the subtlest trap of envy. It offers a cheap and addictive pleasure. There is something comforting in seeing someone who was rising stumble. I knew it would not last. I said it was beginner's luck. Easy money, easy go. This type of satisfaction functions like a drug because it temporarily relieves the discomfort of comparison. But the relief is illusory because it resolves nothing in the real situation of the person who feels envy. Worse, this mental pattern reinforces itself. Every time you find a defect in the success of others, it becomes easier to repeat the process. Every time you explain the prosperity of the other by external factors, luck, injustice, cheating, it becomes harder to assume responsibility for your own results. It is a cycle that keeps the person trapped in the position of victim of circumstances, waiting for luck, justice, or the correction of the world to come solve their problems. The investigation does not end here. In truth, it is only beginning, because recognizing envy is only the first step. What really matters is understanding how it operates specifically in your life, what masks it uses, what decisions it influences silently, and how to transform this emotional thermometer into a tool of self-knowledge instead of self-destruction. Perhaps the central question is not how to protect myself from envious people or how to eliminate envy, but something more honest and disturbing. When someone close prospers, what does this activate in me, and what does this reaction cost me over the years? There is a social experiment that happens naturally whenever someone announces a big achievement in a WhatsApp group of family, old friends, or work colleagues. Pay attention to the reactions that arrive in the first minutes. There are genuine congratulations, but there is also a specific type of silence. And then begin the messages that seem like compliments but carry something strange underneath. Wow, that's good. Hoping everything works out? Congratulations. I hope you managed to sustain it. I am happy for you, just be careful with the pressure that comes with it. Notice how these phrases sound like support, but plant doubts about the durability or legitimacy of the achievement. The records of gossip that survived in letters of the era, personal diaries, and accounts of contemporaries document a pattern that repeats through the centuries. When someone close ascends socially, there exists a phase of intense observation where every detail of the new life is analyzed, commented upon, judged. It is not innocent curiosity. It is a collective investigation looking for signs that the change is not legitimate, will not last, or charges a price that is not worth it. In letters preserved between European aristocratic families of past centuries, there are records of how relatives reacted when some member gained access to the court or prospered in commerce. The language was polite, but the lines in between reveal constant monitoring. How much he spent, how frequently he ostentated, if he maintained the original humility or not. It was as if the success of one placed all the others in a state of alert. obliged to reposition their own identities in relation to the new status of the family member. This phenomenon is not aristocratic, it is human. It happens in any circle where there exists sufficient proximity for the comparison to become personal. Law firms where a junior partner becomes a full partner. Groups of entrepreneurs where one of the members skyrockets in sales. School classes where someone gets the dream job. Families where a cousin or brother prospers more than the others. The proximity intensifies everything because the achievement ceases to be a distant case and becomes someone like me who achieved something I wanted. Robert Frank, in his studies on behavioral economics, mapped how close groups develop informal hierarchies based on signals of status. They are not declared hierarchies, but everyone knows who is above and who is below in terms of money, recognition, opportunities. When someone abruptly changes position on this invisible scale, the entire group needs to reorganize itself. And there begin the resistances. The most subtle form of resistance is disqualification. It is not a direct attack, it is erosion. He was always lucky anyway. Since she was little, she had connections. The family already had contacts. He fell by parachute into the right opportunity. I don't know if he deserves that whole salary. Each phrase seems innocent in isolation, but the set builds a narrative where success is never the result of effort, merit, or correct choices. It is always luck, privilege, chance, injustice. Try to follow what this produces. If all prosperity that you witness up close is explained by external factors, how do you explain your own lack of prosperity? The logic becomes consistent. They have luck, I do not. They have privileges, I do not. The world is unjust to me. It is a closed system that protects the ego but condemns the person to permanent passivity. Franz Alexander, in studies on group dynamics preserved in psychoanalytics archives, described how small communities develop mechanisms of social control through gossip and moral judgment. He who stands out too much becomes a target of collective scrutiny until he fits in again or is expelled from the group. It is not a conscious conspiracy, it is an automatic dynamic that preserves cohesion through forced equality. Look at how this appears in practice. Do you know families where there exists a tacit pressure so that no one prospers much above the others? Groups of friends where he who earns money becomes ashamed to tell? Work environments where he who stands out becomes a target of acidic comments? This is not an accident, it is social regulation. The group keeps everyone on a similar level to avoid the discomfort of comparisons. Only this dynamic has a brutal cost for he who wants to grow, because prospering demands almost always leaving the average of your current circle. It demands thinking differently, risking more, investing time and energy in things that the group does not value or does not understand. And there begins the pressure. You are changing. You are not the same person anymore. You forgot your origins. Money went to your head. Thorstein Veblen identified something even more perverse. Envy does not attack only he who prospers, it contaminates he who is prospering. The person who is rising begins to anticipate criticisms, to justify themselves preventively, to hide achievements so as not to bother the group. It becomes a shamed prosperity which camouflages itself, which asks forgiveness for existing. There are accounts of successful businessmen who develop two versions of themselves. One for the old circles, where they minimize achievements and speak of difficulties, and another for new circles, where they can be honest about results. It is as if success were a dirty secret that needs to be hidden from those who should most celebrate it. Maurice Halbwachs, a sociologist who studied collective memory, recorded how social groups build shared narratives about who deserves what and why. These narratives function as filters that determine which achievements are legitimate and which are suspicious. The problem is that these narratives tend to be conservative. Any rapid change in the social position of a member is automatically suspicious. Notice this mechanism. If the group believed for years that so-and-so had no knack for money, and suddenly so-and-so gets rich, there exists a cognitive dissonance. It is easier to question the legitimacy of the wealth than to revise the evaluation of so-and-so. He must be involved in something dubious. This dough won't last. Ill-gotten money brings no happiness. The narrative of the group protects itself by disqualifying the evidence that contradicts it. This creates a toxic environment for prosperity because he who wants to grow faces resistance exactly where he should find support. The family that should celebrate criticizes. The friends who should be inspired suspect. The colleagues who should learn sabotage. And there the person has two options: give up on growing or give up on the group. Zygmunt Bauman, in notes on modernity preserved in his personal archives, observed how liquid societies produce defensive individualism. Each one protects their resources and opportunities because they trust little in cooperation. But this distrust becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people protect themselves from one another, the less cooperation exists, the less opportunities circulate, the less collective prosperity is formed. Envy functions as a catalyst for this fragmentation. It transforms potential partners into competitors, potential mentors into threats, potential celebrations into motives for resentment. Instead of circles where prosperity multiplies through exchanges, partnerships, and mutual inspirations, circles form where prosperity is seen as treason to the group. There's a particularly revealing sign that appears in these environments: the disproportionate joy at the failures of others. When someone who is rising stumbles, certain people demonstrate a relief and a satisfaction that they cannot completely disguise. I knew it would not last. I said it was too risky. Now he returns to our level. This pleasure with the fall of others is a symptom of crystallized envy. Marcel Proust, in Personal Correspondences, described how Parisian salons functioned as laboratories of refined envy. There were no direct attacks, but a sophisticated system of seemingly complimentary comments that, in truth, corroded reputations. So-and-so is stunning. She must be spending everything on clothes. What a beautiful wedding. I hope he has enough money to maintain this standard. The new house is magnificent. I just think it is a little above their possibilities. Each comment seems like genuine concern, but the set builds a narrative of irresponsibility, fragility, unsustainability. It is envy disguised as prudence, destructiveness masked as care. And it works because it plants doubts in the very person who is prospering. Am I exaggerating? Will it not work? Out? Should I contain myself so as not to bother? The most perverse part is that these doubts become self-sabotage. The person who is prospering begins to question their own decisions, to decrease investments, to break impulses of growth. Not out of real prudence, but out of social pressure disguised as concern. The envy of others contaminates the self-confidence of he who should be celebrating achievements. Georg Simmel, in studies on the sociology of competition, identified how small groups develop normative pressures more intense than large groups. In a city of millions, no one cares if you buy a better car. In a city of 1,000 inhabitants, everyone notices, comments, judges. Social proximity intensifies control through the gaze of the other. This explains why many people only manage to prosper when they leave the original environment. It is not flight, it is necessity. The original group is programmed to keep them in the known position. Any significant change activates automatic resistances. To grow, they need to find groups that celebrate growth instead of punishing it. But here's the central tension: how to distinguish legitimate criticism from envious criticism? Because not all resistance is envy, not all concern is sabotage. Sometimes the group really perceives risks that the person is not seeing. Sometimes the euphoria of a new achievement really produces imprudent decisions. How to separate genuine care from disguised envy? A clue lies in the direction of the suggestions. Genuine care comes accompanied by constructive alternatives. I found this investment risky. How about considering this other option? Disguised envy only points out problems without offering solutions. This is very risky. It will go wrong. You are exaggerating. One tries to help the person prosper with safety. The other tries to convince them not to prosper. Another clue lies in the reaction to good news. He who genuinely cares celebrates achievements before pointing out risks. What a victory. Now just stay attentive to this here. He who is with disguised envy goes straight to the risks. Congratulations, but be careful that this will not last. That's good. I just hope you don't delude yourself. René Girard, in Theory on Mimetic Desire, suggested that we want things because others want them, not because we desire them independently. If this is true, close groups are minefields of triangulated desire. Everyone wants what the other has, but no one admits it. And there, the success of a member of the group is not only conquering something desirable, it is conquering what everyone secretly wanted. Perhaps this is the key to understanding why envy is more intense among those who are close. It is not because we love less those who are near, it is because we mirror more. The achievement of the other reflects personal possibilities and omissions more directly. It is easier to root for a distant stranger than for someone who was in the same situation as you and managed to get out. The investigation points to something disquieting. Prosperity can be a solitary act, not by choice, but by social necessity. He who prospers may need to choose between keeping the original group and keeping the growth, because it is not always possible to keep both. And this choice should not exist in a healthy society. It may be that the problem is not individual envy, but the social systems that feed it. Environments where resources are perceived as scarce, where competition is zero-sum, where difference is a threat. Envy is a symptom, not a cause. And a symptom of what specifically in our way of organizing social relations? There is a letter that Jung wrote to a patient in the late 40s that should be on the wall of any person who has ever caught themselves secretly rooting against someone. He said that the only real cure for envy is not to fight against it, but to use it as an internal compass. Every time you feel that tightening in the stomach with the achievement of others, this is not a moral defect, it is a precise signal pointing exactly to where you still live under scarcity. The question is not how to stop feeling envy, but what does this specific envy reveal about my identity and my beliefs? Notice how this changes everything. Instead of war against a feeling, it becomes an investigation of a symptom. If you feel envy of the neighbor's new house, the issue is not the neighbor nor the house. It is what this achievement activates about your own frustrations with housing, financial stability, social recognition. If you feel envy of a colleague's promotion, the symptom points to something about your unadmitted ambitions, your fears of trying your relationship with authority and deservingness. Viktor Frankl, in notes preserved from his times as a therapist, related cases of patients who transformed envy into fuel for personal growth. They did not deny the feeling, they investigated it. Why exactly does this achievement bother me? What part of my life does this illuminate? What concrete action can I take in the direction of what I really want? Envy became a starting point for self-knowledge, not a final destination for resentment. But this transformation is not automatic nor simple. There exists a powerful internal resistance against admitting envy because our culture treats it as a grave moral defect. It is more socially acceptable to be anxious, depressed, insecure than to be envious. So the first reaction is to deny, disguise, rationalize. It is not envy, it is concern with justice. It is not envy, it is realism about the difficulties. It is not envy, it is experience alerting about risks. Abraham Maslow, in studies on self-actualization, identified something disturbing. People who most denied low emotions like envy were frequently the most blocked from experiencing high emotions like genuine joy, unconditional love, pure admiration. As if the repression of one end of the emotional spectrum contaminated the other end. To feel real joy with the achievements of others, first it was necessary to honestly recognize the reactions of envy when they appeared. Try to follow this turn. Confessed envy becomes less powerful than denied envy. When you admit, "I am feeling envy of his trip," I am with envy of her success. This bothers me, and I need to understand why. The feeling loses part of the toxic charge. It ceases to be an unconscious monster controlling your reactions and becomes a conscious datum that you can investigate. Carl Rogers, in session transcripts preserved in his archives, documented how clients radically changed their relationship with envy when they stopped judging it morally and began to explore it psychologically. How interesting. I feel envy of his freedom to travel. What does this say about my own bindings? How curious. Her success bothers me. What part of me thinks I do not deserve similar success? Look at how this translates in practice. A woman reported systematic envy of friends who achieved stable relationships. Instead of criticizing the relationships of others or attacking the friends, she investigated the pattern. She discovered that she had a deep fear of commitment and sabotaged bonds whenever they became serious. The envy was signaling exactly where she needed to work to get what she really wanted. Here's the strangest part. When you use envy as a thermometer instead of fighting it as an enemy, it gradually loses intensity. Not because you eliminate it, but because it fulfills the function. It is like physical pain that diminishes when you identify and treat the cause. Envy is emotional pain, signaling misalignment between declared values and real actions, between confessed desires and unconscious fears. Erich Fromm, in Manuscripts on Humanistic Psychoanalysis, suggested that healthy societies were those where people could admit difficult emotions without shame and transform them into self-knowledge. Sick societies were those where negative emotions had to be hidden, disguised, projected onto others. Individual envy was a symptom of institutionalized social envy. Notice this dynamic. Cultures that morally criminalize envy frequently institutionalize it politically. Parties that promise to bring down he who prospers, policies that punish success, narratives that present prosperity as automatically suspicious. It is collective envy disguised as social justice, and their individuals remain divided between natural feelings of comparison and cultural pressures to deny them. The only honest exit is to recognize that envy is part of the normal human experience in any environment where perceived scarcity and social comparison exist. The question is not to eliminate it, it is to process it consciously so that it informs choices instead of sabotaging them. This demands what Jung called real humility, different from performative humility. Performative humility is posing as modest while waiting for recognition for the modesty. Real humility is admitting emotional reactions socially prohibited without identifying completely with them. Yes, I feel envy sometimes, and this teaches me about my own unprocessed desires and fears. There are records of ancient religious communities that treated envy as spiritual information. Monks who felt envy of the position of other monks were encouraged to examine this as a sign of unresolved ambitions or unsatisfied needs. It was not a sin to confess envy, it was material for inner work. The problem was not feeling, it was acting destructively starting from the feeling. This approach produces verifiable practical results. People who process envy consciously report a decrease in rumination about the achievements of others, an increase in the capacity to genuinely rejoice with close successes, more clarity about personal objectives, less energy spent on useless comparisons. It is as if the energy previously wasted in resentment were channeled into construction. But here is the central paradox that no one likes to admit. He who most seeks protection against the envy of others is frequently projecting his own unresolved envy. If you live worried about the evil eye, negative energies, people who root against, perhaps the question is, what type of energy have you yourself been directing towards the achievements of others? This is not an accusation, it is an investigation, because the radar to detect the envy of others is calibrated by internal envy. He who has processed his own reactions of envy becomes naturally less sensitive to the envy of others. Not because he develops spiritual shielding, but because he stops projecting internal contents onto the external environment. Daniel Kahneman, in research on cognitive biases, showed how we tend to perceive in the world patterns that we mirror internally. He who lives in fear of betrayal detects signs of betrayal everywhere. He who lives with guilt interprets neutrality as judgment. He who lives with envy perceives the envy of others even where it does not exist or is not significant. So when someone says, so-and-so has envy of me, it may be true, it may be projection, it may be a mixture. The only way to know is to investigate honestly. What reactions of envy have I been having lately? How have I been dealing with the achievements of people close to me? Could it be that I am projecting my own conflicts? The real transformation happens when you stop dividing the world between envious and envied, and recognize that we all circulate between these positions depending on the situation. Today you may feel envy of someone's trip. Tomorrow someone may feel envy of your promotion. It is normal human dynamic, not a moral war, between good and bad. Pierre Bourdieu, in Analyses on Social Capital, identified how prosperous classes develop subtle codes to distinguish who deserves to be here and who should not have access. It is not declared envy, it is a refined system of exclusion based on good taste, adequate education, correct values. Envy institutionalizes itself as an aesthetic and moral criterion. This explains why many people who ascend socially feel imposter syndrome. It is not just personal insecurity, it is real social pressure. There exists constant vigilance over who has the right to what type of prosperity. And this vigilance does not come only from those who are left behind, it comes also from those who are already at the top. The exit is not to try to pierce these dynamics with force or strategy. It is to develop what Abraham Maslow called identity independent of social position. You prosper because you want to build, create, contribute, not because you want to be above others. Your prosperity does not depend on relative position. It depends on the realization of intrinsic potentials. This change of identity is verifiable in concrete actions. He who operates starting from genuine abundance celebrates the achievements of others because they demonstrate that prosperity is possible, spread out, expandable. He who operates starting from scarcity sees each achievement of others as a reduction of his own chances. One mentality multiplies opportunities through connections, the other isolates out of fear of competition. But how to leave scarcity for abundance? The record suggests that it is not a change of belief, it is a change of behavior sustained over time. You do not think differently and then act differently. You act differently repeatedly, and this gradually changes how you think and feel. Specific actions. Stop monitoring the achievements of others. On social networks, celebrate close successes even when they bother. Actively seek connection with prosperous people instead of avoiding them. Invest time in own capabilities instead of analyzing what others do wrong. Transform destructive comparisons into useful learning. Every time you resist the automatic impulse to find a defect in an achievement of others and choose consciously to congratulate, investigate what you can learn, or simply ignore if you cannot celebrate genuinely, you are retraining neural circuits. It is not cheesy self-help, it is applied neuroplasticity. Jung, in Final Correspondences, admitted that it took decades to transform his own envy of more recognized colleagues into curiosity about different methods of work. It was not sudden illumination, it was consistent practice of investigating automatic reactions and choosing more constructive responses. The investigation ends where it began, with an honest question. When someone close conquers something significant, what is your spontaneous reaction before any social filter? If it is not authentic joy, you have precious material for self-knowledge. Not to punish yourself, but to understand where you still operate starting from scarcity instead of abundance. Perhaps envy never disappears completely, but it can transform from a destructive force into useful information. From a sign that something is wrong with the world to a sign that something needs to be investigated in you. From justification for resentment into fuel for growth. The final question is not how to eliminate envy, but what has my envy been teaching me about who I am and where I want to go? And if you have the courage to investigate this question honestly, you may discover that your most uncomfortable feelings are your most precise teachers.